Hello everyone, my name is Cesar Campos. I am a physician from Peru. I want to give a brief overview of a book I recently read that I found very intriguing and fascinating. This overview is mainly directed to students of any level and of any area that want to improve their learning. The book is called The Learning Paradox: How Our Unconscious Minds Misguide Our Learning Strategies, and was written by one of my mentors. His name is Dr. Felipe Frekni. He is a physician and researcher from Harvard University. My goal here is to awaken a spark of interest in you regarding this topic, so you can explore it more by either taking a look at the book or researching more by yourself, because I am sure it will help improve your academic lives in the same way it is already improving mine. We will use the same organization used in the book to guide the presentation, which divides the content into 7 chapters. In the introductory chapter, an emphasis is put in the difference between superficial and deep learning. We are used to have metrics of success of superficial learning, like grading, in a school or in the university. For instance, it is relatively easy to cram all of the study material 1 or 2 days before the exam and get an excellent grade, but forget almost everything 1 week after. This would be an example of superficial learning. Conversely, if you study analyzing the content, trying to understand it deeply, but maybe ending up not getting an excellent grade, which can happen if the teacher tests what he or she wants us to know instead of what is really important, the knowledge more probably will be long lasting and meaningful, despite the grade saying otherwise. The next logical question is how to achieve deep learning. Well, one way is to use our slow thinking process, which, in contrast to the fast one, is more critical and analytical. The fast thinking process is more intuitive and driven by emotions. The downside of the slow one is that it requires more time and effort. However, it is preferred over the fast because it leads to a smaller number of errors. The chapter 2 is called the Ivy League Paradox. This chapter talks about the limitations of using scores for assessing learning. There are some big companies like Google that do not focus primarily on which school you went to or your GPA score. They focus instead on the cognitive ability of the candidate, that is to say, the ability to learn in different environments quickly. They do this because they have found out that scores do not predict job productivity. Sadly, this ability to learn is not that well trained with formal education, in which a structured curriculum must be followed. Rather, it should be fostered by letting students ask themselves questions and look for the answers through critical thinking. If we do this, the students will learn deeply instead of just memorizing. It is better to organize the new information acquired in our brain in a logical and structured manner, and not randomly. By doing this, when trying to retrieve that stored information, it will be easier to recall because of the responsible layout that was created in our memory, instead of searching without any clues. The third chapter talks about the concept of delayed and immediate gratification. Here a hypothetical scenario. If someone offers you to have a perfect grade in your most important course exam by cramming some days before, or to study putting a considerable amount of time and effort to make the learning deep and significant, what do you think your brain would prefer? The answer is, well, the grade. This occurs because of the appeal of immediate gratification. Despite the enormous benefits of studying in the long term, which can be life success, we tend to prefer the immediate reward. This happens because of the difficulty with waiting periods. Our brains prefer not to wait for the reward. However, not everything is bad news. Studies have found that it is easier to wait for the delayed gratification if you are sure and really believe that you will receive the delayed reward if you work hard. So be mindful of that. In chapter number 4, an interesting concept is explained, which is cognitive dissonance. Cognitive dissonance occurs when we have to choose between two options. For example, if we have to choose between doing sports or studying, if the values that we give them are similar, after choosing, to decrease the sensation of a considerable loss, we tend to reframe our thinking to modify the values of the options. For example, we can say that sports increase our overall health in order to increase its value and decrease the sense of loss from not studying. This causes us to give a relatively low value to studying, and after repeating that thought process every time we choose sports over studying, its value continues to decrease. If we give low value to study, it is reasonable that it will have detrimental effects on learning. Therefore, we can say that cognitive dissonance can eventually have negative effects on our learning. Chapter 5 talks about the placebo and nocebo effect in learning. If prior to a learning experience we have positive expectations, we will have an improved learning outcome. It is like taking a placebo pill and expecting that it will alleviate my headache. It can sometimes have some degree of effectiveness. We have to be careful of the opposite effect, which is the nocebo effect, in which, for example, having failed math courses historically can predispose you to perform poorly again. This happens due to poor expectations. Additionally, expectations can affect motivation, which can further negatively impact the learning outcomes. It has been seen in experiments that taking two placebo pills can have more effect than only taking one. In learning, this can be exemplified by offering the same entire material, like a course, over 2 months instead of over 2 weeks. Here, there will be an increase in the individual perception of learning despite the amount of material being the same. Similarly, branded placebo offers a greater placebo effect than unbranded placebo in studies. In learning, this can be translated to learning more in a course from a more prestigious university, for example. Again, this may be explained due to the expectation. Students can expect to learn more from a prestigious university compared to a less prestigious one, and this can modify the learning outcome despite the content of the courses being exactly the same. Chapter 6 deals with the concept of self confidence, illustrating it with the big fish, little pond effect. Is it always advisable to pursue Harvard after college? The answer is not that simple. By doing some experiments, it is known that being a student around classmates that are bright and achieve better grades than yourself can in fact decrease your self confidence. This, understandably, can cause a decrease in your academic performance. This is known as the big fish, little pond effect. Therefore, the opposite is also true. If we have higher self confidence, it will improve our learning performance. We should be aware of that and use it to our advantage. There are some ways in which we can decrease the big fish, little pond effect, namely, not to be negatively influenced by our competitive environment. First, the emphasis on grading must be reduced. Students should be assessed according to their time engaged in learning tasks rather than exams. In addition, we should focus on our learning trajectory and avoid as much as possible comparing with others' learning trajectories. Lastly, instead of comparing ourselves to others, we should enjoy every victory, no matter how small, and fit our motivational system and shutting down our surroundings. In the last chapter, it is discussed the concept of metacognition. This interesting concept refers to thinking about the thinking process itself. An example is learning by trial and error, in which the student must reflect on what went wrong to change and adapt the learning strategies. Unfortunately, in schools, students are given a response before they can even think of a question. They should, instead, first expose the students to the experience before the theory. We have to be careful of some causes of poor learning performance, so we can detect and correct them. A couple of them are lack of intrinsic motivation, which means minimal interest, and cognitive overload. Additionally, if your study and learning time feels like a painful chore, you are probably unlikely to experience meaningful learning. In conclusion, you should observe which learning strategies and outcomes work the best for you so you can improve your learning effectiveness by focusing on using those strategies the most. In summary, this book gives important insights into the following concepts: deep learning, the emphasis that should be put on the ability to learn over scores; immediate and delayed gratification; cognitive dissonance; the placebo and nocebo effects; and self-confidence implications in learning. All of these tell us that we have to be aware that some learning processes exist and matter, and if we use them to our benefit, we can improve our learning effectiveness and be more knowledgeable in the long run. As I said in the beginning, this entire video was based on the book The Learning Paradox: How Our Unconscious Minds Misguide Our Learning Strategies by Dr. Felipe Freckney, and is intended to inspire you to read it and research more about the topic so you can enhance your learning and hopefully be more successful in life. Thank you very much.